The street was quiet enough to hear the hum of bees. Morning sunlight spilled across Grandma Rose's small garden, gilding the rows of tulips she'd tended for years. Her hands were slow now, fingers spotted and trembling, but each motion was deliberate, a ritual of care. She knelt to pat the soil around a new bloom, whispering something soft to it. When the stillness shattered, shouts, laughter, the metallic whir of bicycle chains. 3 teenage boys tore around the corner, tires biting gravel. They didn't slow. One handlebar clipped her gate, flinging it open, and the front wheel carved through her flower bed. The shock of impact spun her sideways. The world tilted, a flash of sky, the smell of dirt, then the thud of her body on the walkway. The laughter didn't stop. It grew louder, crueler, fading only when the bikes vanished down the street. Inside the house, Eli heard the cry. A dish clattered to the floor as he ran out, his heart pounding faster than his steps. She was on the ground, dress streaked with soil. The blue pot beside her cracked in two. He dropped to his knees. "Grandma," he breathed, but the word caught like gravel in his throat. Her glasses lay in the grass. A thin line of blood curved across her hand. Across the street, curtain shifted. Neighbors watching, saying nothing. Eli gathered the broken pot pieces, setting them carefully on the porch. His hands trembled so violently that the shards clicked together like teeth. The laughter still echoed somewhere far off, an aftermeat he couldn't scrub from his mind. He looked at the ruined bed of flowers, her pride, her joy, and felt something harden deep inside. The air smelled of bruised petals and silence. He took her hand gently, but his jaw was clenched. When she tried to smile, it only deepened the crack inside him. That was the day something broke in him, too. Eli's world ran on tired routines and half-light. By the time most of the town slept, he was behind the counter at the gas station, the buzzing fluorescent bulbs painting his face in pale exhaustion. The hum of the coolers and the quiet tick of the wall clock were his company. He'd wipe down the coffee station, ring up travelers who barely looked at him, and count the same stack of crumpled bills again and again. It wasn't a life he chose. It was what was left when everyone else moved on. When his parents left, Grandma Rose became his gravity. She'd kept him steady through years of small heartbreaks, mischances, unpaid bills, friendships that faded when people learned too much about his life. The old house was their world, peeling paint, humming fridge, and a porch swing that creaked like a loyal witness. He fixed what broke and mowed the lawn every Sunday, even when his muscles ached from night shifts. He'd come home as dawn peeled open the sky, set down a bag of groceries, and warm her oatmeal before she woke. Then he'd help her with her medicine, 3 pills, a sip of water, and her whispered thank you that somehow held the whole world in it. He didn't talk much. His eyes said what his mouth didn't, that he was tired, that he was angry, that he was trying not to be either. When she smiled, the tightness in his chest eased. She was his reason to keep the softness alive. Without her, the anger waiting beneath the surface might have finally learned his name. The town looked harmless from a distance. Just rows of modest houses, sagging fences, and mailboxes leaning like old men waiting for a bus that would never come. But up close, it felt divided by invisible lines. The people on Eli Street nodded politely in daylight and whispered in the dark. They spoke of him in half-sentences at grocery aisles and church steps, how his eyes carried storms, how his temper might one day spill over. No one mentioned how much he did for his grandmother, or how quietly he lived, mending the same fence boards every spring because no one else offered to help. The days all sounded the same. Barking dogs, screen doors slamming, the distant hiss of lawn sprinklers that never reached his side of the street. The air itself seemed tired, heavy with the smell of rust and rain-soaked asphalt. Eli moved through it like a man underwater, slow and deliberate, conserving breath. The world around him had forgotten softness, and he was starting to believe it would never remember. But at sunset, the world shifted. That was their time, his and Grandma Rose's. They'd sit side by side on the porch, the fading light spilling over their faces, the day's noise dimming to a hush. She'd hum the same old hymn her husband once sang while painting the fence, and for a few minutes, the edges of Eli's anger blurred. She'd turn to him with that knowing smile and say, "Kindness runs in our family. Eli, don't let the world take it from you." He never answered out loud, just watched the sky burn gold and fade to violet, gripping that sentence like a small, flickering promise he wasn't sure he could keep. A week later, the bruises on Grandma Rose's arms had turned the color of storm clouds. She moved with small, careful steps, her breath catching each time she bent. Eli tried to hide how it tore at him. The way she pretended the pain was nothing. The way she winced when the floorboards creaked under her weight. The doctor said rest. She said prayer. Neither healed the wound that lived deeper. The one pride couldn't name. The boys still rode by. Their laughter was a jagged echo. A reminder. One afternoon, they passed close enough that dust from their tires landed on her roses. One of them mimicked her limp, dragging his foot dramatically while the others laughed. Eli saw it from the porch. His grip on the railing tightened until the wood creaked. Grandma Rose's voice, faint but steady, floated toward him. Let it go. Eli, don't give them your peace. But peace had already packed its bags. He tried doing the right things, filed a report, spoke to the officer on duty. The man shrugged, said, boys will be boys. She's lucky it wasn't worse. Eli stared at the desk, at the coffee stain spreading across the paperwork. He wanted to ask if decency had an expiration date, if cruelty was cheaper to excuse than to stop. Instead, he walked out, the heat in his chest burning higher than the sun. In the following days, the neighborhood's silence became another kind of noise. Conversations died when he entered the store. His old friends looked away. Even the pastor's wife offered only a stiff nod at Sunday service. The unspoken message hung heavy. Stay quiet, keep your head down. Then came the night of the fence. Eli was fixing the porch light when he heard the hiss, the unmistakable sputter of a spray can. He stepped off the porch and froze. Under the street lamp, 3 silhouettes leaned against his grandmother's fence, black paint staining the boards. Cruel words dripped in fresh lines. Crazy old witch, hey. Eli's voice tore through the dark. The boys spun around, startled. Then one grabbed a rock and hurled it. The crash of shattering glass split the silence. His truck window exploded into glittering fragments. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. They jumped on their bikes and vanished down the street, leaving only the stench of paint and gasoline. Eli stood there, breathing hard, glass crunching under his boots. His reflection in the broken window looked like someone he didn't know. Eyes wild, jaw clenched, rage flickering like a live wire. For the first time, he felt how easy it would be to stop caring, to become what they already believed he was. Somewhere inside the house, Grandma Rose called his name. He didn't answer. His fists were still trembling, his pulse drumming against the quiet. The fence stood there, wounded and waiting. The night felt endless. If you've ever watched someone good suffer for no reason, you'll want to see how this ends. Morning came gray and unforgiving. Rain dripped from the porch roof, tapping against the cracked steps like a metronome for the silence inside. Grandma Rose moved slowly through the kitchen, her limp more pronounced now, her breath uneven. She tried to hum the tune she always did, the one that used to fill their mornings with a soft kind of hope. But her voice wavered. Eli sat at the table, jaw tight, staring at his untouched coffee. Eli, she said gently, it's just a fence. Wood can be painted over. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. It's not the fence, Grandma. It's them. It's everyone. He pushed the mug away, the clink echoing louder than it should have. They saw what happened, and they laughed. The police didn't care. The neighbors didn't care. Nobody cares unless it's happening to them. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, staring down at the table's faded grooves. His breathing quickened. I should have stopped them. I should have done something. The words cracked in his throat. I should have protected you. When she said nothing, the silence filled the room like fog. He grabbed his keys and stepped outside, the morning air heavy with the smell of wet earth and oil. Inside the truck, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Rain began to fall harder, streaking across the windshield, blurring the world outside. His reflection looked fractured, distorted by the glass. Tears mixed with the rain as he whispered again, softer this time, I should have protected her. He sat there until the ache became unbearable, then went back inside. On the living room shelf, the old photographs waited, his grandmother and grandfather in black and white smiles, her holding a basket of flowers, the garden full and alive. The colors in those pictures felt like a different world, one where kindness still mattered. Now the garden lay ruined, and she looked so small beneath the dim light. She came to him, her hand trembling as she placed it on his arm. Anger is heavy. Eli, she murmured, don't carry it too long. It'll turn you into someone else. He wanted to listen. He wanted to promise he'd let it go. But the fire inside him burned fiercely to smother. Without a word, he turned and left, the screen door slamming behind him. The rain swallowed him as he drove, the wipers struggling to keep up. Street lights blurred into streaks of gold and gray. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to move to outrun the helplessness pressing on his chest. In the rearview mirror, home disappeared into the mist, and with it, the last piece of calm he had left. The storm had wandered off, but left the sky smeared with low, restless clouds. Eli drove aimlessly, his headlights cutting brief tunnels through the fog. When he finally pulled into a convenience store parking lot, the lights buzzed above him in tired yellow halos. He meant only to rest, maybe clear his head before facing the house again. Then he heard it, a voice sharp with mockery, followed by a muffled plea. Across the lot, a teenager was shoving an elderly homeless man near the ice machine. The man's coat hung in tatters. His cardboard sign lay soaked in a puddle. "Get up, you old freak," the boy sneered, kicking the sign aside. Something inside Eli twisted, not in rage, but in recognition. The cruelty had the same sound, the same echo that still lived in his bones from that day in the garden. Before he knew it, he was out of the truck. The slam of the door cracked through the night. "Hey," he shouted, "leave him alone." His voice filled the empty space between them. The boy froze, then turned, smirking when he recognized him. "Oh, the tough guy again," he said, stepping forward. "You here to fight me now?" Eli's chest tightened. "Walk away," he warned. His voice shook, not from fear, but from something heavier. Fatigue, disappointment, the weight of all the moments he hadn't been able to stop. The boy was about to speak again when headlights burst across the lot, flooding everything in stark white. A low engine rumbled as a dark military jeep rolled to a stop. The door opened, and 3 off-duty soldiers stepped out, broad-shouldered, calm, the kind of presence that quieted everything without effort. The teen's grin faltered. One of the men, tall and steady-eyed, took a few steps forward. The name on his chest read Sergeant Cole. His voice carried the calm gravity of someone who had seen far worse than this. "Son," he said evenly, "is this how you show strength?" The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. He backed away, muttering something about just joking, then turned and ran. The others followed, their laughter replaced by the squeak of retreating tires. Eli stood frozen, rain still dripping from his hair. The soldiers looked at him, measuring him, not with suspicion, but quiet understanding. Cole approached slowly. "You all right?" Eli nodded, though his voice barely held. "Yeah, just tired." Cole glanced toward the old man, then back at Eli. "Come inside. Coffee's better company than ghosts." Inside the small store, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. The soldiers ordered black coffee for everyone, handed one to Eli without asking what he wanted. They didn't pry, just listened as he haltingly spoke about the fence, the boys, his grandmother, the silence of everyone else. When he finished, Cole set his cup down. "You did right tonight," he said simply. "Sometimes strength looks like stepping in, not striking back." Eli stared into his coffee, steam curling between his fingers. For the first time in weeks, something inside him eased, not gone, but no longer clawing at him. "If you believe that sometimes strangers appear for a reason, keep watching." The sun rose quietly, as if unsure it was welcome after so many dark nights. Eli stirred at the sound of engines outside. Steady, purposeful, familiar. He stepped onto the porch and froze. Parked by the curb was the same military jeep from the night before. 3 soldiers stood in his yard, jackets off, sleeves rolled, already setting out tools. Sergeant Cole gave a nod of greeting, calm as ever. "Morning. Eli, heard you had a fence that needed fixing." Eli opened his mouth, but no words came. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't need it. One man scraped away the graffiti with a wire brush while another replaced cracked boards. Cole worked beside them, quiet and precise. Their movements carried a rhythm, focused, dignified, unhurried. Grandma Rose came to the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "You didn't have to," she began, her voice trembling. Cole looked up and smiled gently. "Ma'am, some things you don't leave broken." Then he went back to hammering, the sound sharp and clean in the morning air. Neighbors began to drift out of their houses, drawn by curiosity. Curtains lifted, whispers floated. No one had ever seen soldiers on this street, let alone mending fences. Eli felt something loosen in his chest as he watched, the quiet grace of action speaking louder than any apology the town had refused to give. Then, at the end of the block, the boys appeared, the same ones. Their bikes slowed as they took in the scene, uniformed men working on the fence they had defaced. Cole noticed them but didn't raise his voice. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward them, each step measured. "You the ones who did this?" he asked, not accusing, just certain. The boys glanced at one another. No one answered. Cole nodded toward the fence. "You see that woman there?" He pointed to Grandma Rose, who stood watching with eyes too kind for the hurt she carried. "She reminds me of my mother. A person like that deserves respect. A man, any man, earns his worth by what he protects, not what he harms." The words landed heavy, carried not by anger but authority, and something in the boys' faces changed. One lowered his head, another shifted his weight, ashamed. After a long silence, the oldest whispered, "We're sorry, sir." Cole gave a small nod. "Then show it." Without another word, the boys dropped their bikes and joined in, scrubbing, painting, sanding the last of the rough edges. The neighbors kept watching, some wiping their eyes. It wasn't spectacle, it was redemption unfolding in real time. The rhythm of hammers and brushes filled the air like a hymn of repair. When the final board was nailed in place, the fence gleamed white again, fresh against the rising sun. Grandma Rose pressed a hand to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. Eli turned to her and saw a light he hadn't seen in weeks. Pride, forgiveness, peace. For the first time, justice didn't look like vengeance. It looked like healing. When the last brushstroke dried, the morning had turned bright and clear. The soldiers stood back to admire their work, each board straight, the paint a clean, forgiving white that almost glowed in the sunlight. The ugly words were gone, erased as if they had never existed. Grandma Rose stepped off the porch slowly, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. The soldiers turned toward her, their faces soft with respect. Sergeant Cole unfastened something from the shoulder of his uniform jacket. A fabric patch, worn at the edges, the stitching frayed from years of service. He held it carefully for a moment, thumb brushing across the emblem, before placing it in her hand. "This is for your garden," he said quietly. "For strength." It's seen storms and still held together. "Thought maybe it could remind you to do the same." Grandma Rose's fingers trembled as she looked down at the patch. The gold thread caught the sunlight, and her eyes filled. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Cole smiled. "You already said it." You kept standing. Eli stood beside her, silent, his throat thick. For once, words felt too small. He wanted to thank them, to explain what it meant to see strangers do what his own town wouldn't. But he couldn't speak past the weight in his chest. Behind them, the boys shuffled their feet, their earlier bravado gone. The oldest one stepped forward, eyes down. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we're sorry. For everything. We didn't know what it felt like to hurt someone like that." His voice cracked on the last word. Grandma Rose looked at them for a long moment, the kind of gaze that saw past what they'd done and into who they might still become. Then she smiled faintly and turned toward her porch. From a small pot by the steps, she plucked 3 fresh blooms, bright yellow daisies, their petals still wet with dew. She walked back and placed one in each boy's hand. "These are for you," she said. "They won't last long unless you care for them. That's how kindness works too." The boys nodded, their faces pink with shame and something new. Understanding. Eli watched the exchange, his grandmother standing there between the scarred fence and the morning sun, her silver hair catching the light. The soldier stood quietly, head slightly bowed, as if witnessing something sacred. In that simple moment, the patch in her hand, the flowers in theirs, the weight that had burdened the street for weeks lifted. The symbols were small, but they spoke louder than punishment ever could. Restoration, honor, healing. The days that followed carried a different kind of quiet, one that felt peaceful instead of heavy. The street, once thick with tension and whispers, seemed to breathe again. The boys who had mocked Grandma Rose now offered shy greetings when they passed. One even waved while mowing his yard. The neighbors, too, began to nod at Eli in the mornings, their smiles hesitant but real. It wasn't apology, not quite, but it was change. Eli repaired his truck, sweeping away the shards of glass that had once glinted like reminders of failure. The engine started after the 3rd try, coughing back to life, and he felt something inside him do the same. Each night after his shift, he came home to find Grandma Rose waiting with 2 mugs of tea and that old soft smile. They'd sit on the porch again, talking less, feeling more. The bruises on her arms faded to faint shadows, but the gentleness in her eyes never dimmed. Together, they replanted the flowers, each one a small promise that life, even broken, could bloom again. Weeks later, a letter arrived. The envelope was crisp, the handwriting neat and sure. It was from Sergeant Cole. Dear Mrs. Rose and Eli, it read, we wanted you to know that your family reminded us what we fight for. Not just freedom, but decency. What you showed those boys was stronger than anger. Thank you for reminding us that kindness still matters, even when the world forgets. Eli folded the letter carefully and looked toward the fence. The morning sun was spilling across it now, lighting the boards in a soft golden wash. He walked over, the patch still in his pocket, and fastened it to the fence post, the same post that once carried ugly words. Now it carried meaning. The emblem fluttered in the breeze like a small, proud flag of peace. Grandma Rose joined him, her hand light on his arm. She smiled at the sky. See, she said softly, kindness always comes home. Eli looked at her, the light warming his face, the scent of new blossoms rising from the garden below. For the first time in a long while, the world felt whole again. The moment lingered, gentle and complete, as if the air itself was humming its approval. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar, it repairs. It doesn't come wrapped in power or fury, but in quiet hands that choose to mend what others have broken. And sometimes, heroes don't wear capes, they wear compassion. They step forward when no one else will, not for praise or glory, but because their hearts refuse to stay silent. If this story moved you, share it to remind the world that kindness can rebuild what cruelty breaks. Every act of decency ripples farther than we know. What would you have done if you saw this? Let us know in the comments, and maybe, together, we'll make sure stories like this one aren't the exception, but the example.